The moment I stepped out of the court divorce mediation room, the air itself felt like release. I clutched the finalized divorce decree and drove back to the villa we had once shared, returning only to collect the last of my personal belongings. The car had barely come to a stop when the front door was yanked open. My mother-in-law stood barricaded in the entryway, arms crossed, her face twisted with contempt. Before I could even set foot inside, she screeched at a volume that sent echoes down the corridor. "Get out. From now on, you are never to set foot in my house again. This is our family's property. You are an outsider, and you don't deserve to step foot here." She spread her arms wide, blocking the doorframe, her eyes dripping with smug superiority. Gone was the fawning manner she had shown when my family's capital had kept her son's company afloat. Now that the divorce was done, she couldn't wait to turn on me. I stood at the bottom of the steps, watching her flail. I didn't get angry. Instead, I curled my lips into a faint smile and slowly let my gaze drift over the villa she treated as her badge of pride. "Mother, don't rush to throw me out just yet." My tone was calm, every word landing like a precise needle in her ears. "This villa, the down payment, the renovations, all of it was purchased independently by me before our marriage. The property deed has always been in my name alone. I listed it for sale half a month ago, and the new owner is taking possession next week." The arrogance on my mother-in-law's face froze solid. Her pupils shrank. Just as she opened her mouth to retort, I delivered a heavier blow. "And as for your so-called proud son, the controlling shareholder of that company has always been me." Immediately after today's court session, I convened a board meeting and formally removed him from his position as CEO. All his management authority has been revoked. As of tomorrow, he no longer needs to report to work. The words landed. My mother-in-law staggered backward, her legs buckling, staring at me in disbelief. Her domineering posture collapsed entirely. She stood frozen, unable to utter a single coherent word. The moment I stepped out of the court divorce mediation room, the air itself felt like release. I clutched the finalized divorce decree and drove back to the villa we had once shared, returning only to collect the last of my personal belongings. The car had barely come to a stop when the front door was yanked open. My mother-in-law stood barricaded in the entryway, arms crossed, her face twisted with contempt. Before I could even set foot inside, she screeched at a volume that sent echoes down the corridor. "Get out. From now on, you are never to set foot in my house again. This is our family's property. You are an outsider, and you don't deserve to step foot here." She spread her arms wide, blocking the doorframe, her eyes dripping with smug superiority. Gone was the fawning manner she had shown when my family's capital had kept her son's company afloat. Now that the divorce was done, she couldn't wait to turn on me. I stood at the bottom of the steps, watching her flail. I didn't get angry. Instead, I curled my lips into a faint smile and slowly let my gaze drift over the villa she treated as her badge of pride. "Mother, don't rush to throw me out just yet." My tone was calm, every word landing like a precise needle in her ears. "This villa, the down payment, the renovations, all of it was purchased independently by me before our marriage. The property deed has always been in my name alone. I listed it for sale half a month ago, and the new owner is taking possession next week." The arrogance on my mother-in-law's face froze solid. Her pupils shrank. Just as she opened her mouth to retort, I delivered a heavier blow. "And as for your so-called proud son, the controlling shareholder of that company has always been me." Immediately after today's court session, I convened a board meeting and formally removed him from his position as CEO. All his management authority has been revoked. As of tomorrow, he no longer needs to report to work. The words landed. My mother-in-law staggered backward, her legs buckling, staring at me in disbelief. Her domineering posture collapsed entirely. She stood frozen, unable to utter a single coherent word. I walked past her in my high heels, the sharp clicks echoing off the marble floor. The living room was exactly as I had left it 3 months ago. The dried white roses on the coffee table were the ones I had arranged myself, their petals now curled into brittle brown fragments. I went straight upstairs and pushed open the master bedroom door. His suits still hung next to my custom-made ensembles in the wardrobe. His cufflinks lay jumbled with my necklaces in the drawer. I took out the suitcase I had prepared in advance and packed only a few changes of clothes, the pair of emerald earrings, and the worn photo album at the back of the drawer, the one with pictures of my parents and me from when they were still alive. From downstairs came my mother-in-law's hysterical sobbing and shouting into the phone, her voice as shrill as shattering glass. "Son, come back quickly. That woman has gone mad. She says she sold the house and the company is gone too." Through the receiver, I could hear my ex-husband James's frantic voice. He had just left the courthouse, probably still in the parking lot, and was no doubt flooring the accelerator to get here. I calmly zipped my suitcase, pulled out my phone, and dialed a contact labeled Marcus Whitmore. It rang twice before being answered. "Mr. Whitmore, we can move up the handover," I said. "Tomorrow at 9 in the morning, bring your team directly for the transfer." "Not a problem, Miss Aileen." A steady baritone came through. "Do you have the keys and the title documents ready?" "All set." I hung up and heard the screech of tires outside, followed by the slam of a car door. James's footsteps pounded through the living room and stopped at the bottom of the stairs. He looked up and saw me standing by the second-floor railing, suitcase in hand. He was 34, with the same light brown eyes as his mother. Now the whites were shot with red, his tie hung askew, and he looked like a man who had just crawled ashore from a shipwreck. We had known each other for 8 years, married for 5. I had never seen him so disheveled. "Aileen, what are you talking about?" He was breathless, anger pressing beneath his voice. "Selling the house? Revoking my position? When did you call a board meeting?" I descended the stairs slowly, each step measured. The suitcase wheels bumped lightly against the steps with a steady rhythm. When I reached him, I stopped and looked him straight in the eye. "James, the divorce agreement is crystal clear. Asset division follows the prenuptial agreement." I pulled the decree from my bag and held it open before him. "Didn't you read it carefully? Or did you simply never think I would actually enforce it?" He reached for the document, but I sidestepped and tucked it back into my bag. "You signed a prenuptial property agreement before the wedding," I said. "The down payment for that house came from the trust fund my parents left me, and the renovation costs came from the proceeds of my first gallery sale. All payment records are filed with the law firm. You've lived here for years and paid the utilities and maintenance fees for your mother, but none of that changes the ownership." James's Adam's apple bobbed violently. His mother rushed up behind him, gripping his arm, her eyes rimmed red, lips trembling. "Son, is she telling the truth? The company is hers too?" James did not answer, but his silence was answer enough. My mother-in-law let out a short sob, her body swaying. She steadied herself against the arm of the sofa. Watching her, I felt neither satisfaction nor pity, only a peace I had not known for a long time. The film that had covered my life for 5 years had finally been torn away. I carried my suitcase toward the door. As I passed my mother-in-law, she suddenly grabbed my wrist, her nails digging almost into my skin. "You can't just leave like this. You've ruined us. How can you have any conscience left?" I looked down at her hand, then raised my eyes to hers. "Conscience." I repeated the word softly. "Mother, I'll call you that one last time. Do you remember 3 years ago, when my father was critically ill, what you said to me? A married daughter is like spilled water. Your family's business has nothing to do with my son. You told me not to use company funds to pay my father's hospital bills." I remember every word. Her fingers stiffened and slowly released. "I sold 2 of my paintings to raise the money," I continued. "My father survived, but he's still in a nursing home because your son, under the pretext of capital turnover, drained every last drop of liquid funds from my accounts. You want to talk about conscience? We can start from the beginning if you like." My mother-in-law retreated half a step, her mouth opening and closing, but no sound came. I pulled open the door. The early autumn wind rushed in, carrying the scent of the old oak tree in the garden. Sunlight fell across the steps in crisp slants, dividing shadow and light into 2 neat halves. "Tomorrow at 9, Mr. Whitmore will come for the house." I turned sideways and gave them one last look. Also, the HR notice about the personnel change has been sent to all employees. You don't need to go to work tomorrow. Your access card and system permissions have already been revoked. I stepped into the sunlight. Behind me, the villa's door closed slowly, muffling my mother-in-law's suppressed wails and James's heavy breathing. Settling into the car, I didn't start the engine right away. My hands rested on the steering wheel, fingertips slightly cool. In the rearview mirror, I could see the house I had lived in for 5 years, its cream-colored facade, the arched window ledges, still hung with the withered holly wreath I had made last Christmas, now brown and drooping like a severed rope. I took a deep breath and started the car. As I drove down the familiar tree-lined avenue, my phone vibrated in the passenger seat. I glanced at the screen, an unsaved number, but I recognized the last few digits. It was my former sister-in-law Lydia's private mobile. I let it ring until it stopped. A moment later, a text message popped up with just one line. Sister-in-law, my brother just told me everything. How could you do this? Can our family sit down and talk properly? I turned the phone face down on the seat and pressed the accelerator, merging into the main traffic flow. The city skyline spread out beyond the windscreen, glass facades reflecting the afternoon light like scattered gold dust across the asphalt. I decided to go see my father at the nursing home first. The nursing home sat on a gentle slope on the city's outskirts, surrounded by manicured lawns and sparse birch woods. I arrived during the afternoon visiting hours. The corridors carried the faint smell of disinfectant, punctuated now and then by the aroma of baked apples drifting from the kitchen. A nurse pushed an elderly resident in a wheelchair by a sunlit window. A radio played a low cello piece. My father's room was at the end of the hall, the door half open, the sound of television news filtering out. I pushed the door gently and saw him propped against the headboard, reading glasses on his nose, a thick gardening book in his hands. Chemotherapy had made him thin, his cheekbones prominent, his hair almost transparently white, but his eyes were still clear, and when he saw me, the corners of his mouth lifted immediately. You're here? He put down the book and took off his glasses. Earlier than usual. I leaned my suitcase against the wall, walked to the bedside, and took his cool hand. The back of it still bore tape marks from fur lines, the veins slightly raised from long-term infusions, like roots winding beneath delicate skin. It's all done today, I said. My father looked at me for a few seconds, asked no further questions, but simply clasped my hand and patted it gently. Tired, my throat tightened a little. I turned my gaze to the window. On the lawn, several elderly residents were walking slowly with their nurses. One, in a bright yellow cardigan, hobbled along but refused assistance. The sunlight caught her silver hair like a warm gilding. Dad. I turned back. I've taken the company back. James, it's over. My father was silent for a moment, then nodded. If your mother were still here, she'd say it's about time. He smiled, but there was a touch of melancholy in it. Aileen, in these years lying in this bed, I've thought it over again and again. Agreeing to you and James back then was too hasty. Your mother and I. We valued his family background and his respectable appearance, but we didn't see what lay underneath. It's not your fault, I said. I made the choice. You chose the wrong person, but you didn't do anything wrong. My father's eyes fell on the old photograph on the bedside table, my mother in a floral dress, standing in the garden holding 5-year-old me, her eyes curved with laughter. Before she left, your mother told me that our daughter may seem gentle, but deep down she's most like her. I looked down at my own hands. The nude pink nail polish I had applied this morning was already slightly chipped at the edges. These hands had signed countless contracts, drawn dozens of sketches, chaired over 100 board meetings over the past 5 years, and yet, in the same house, they had also made James's breakfast, ironed his shirts, and prepared entire banquets for his mother's birthdays. All those wife duties I had performed. But in the end, I realized that very identity had been a cage. I left the nursing home at dusk. The sky was ablaze with orange-red clouds, as if someone had squeezed an entire tube of pigment across the horizon. I sat in the car for a while, then turned on my phone. 37 unread messages and 12 missed calls appeared. James had called 7 times, Lydia 3, my mother-in-law twice. The rest were from company shareholders and a few close colleagues. I opened the last voice message from James. His voice was tired and restrained, even carrying a tone of humility I had never heard from him before. Aileen, can we meet and talk? Just once. I understand what you've done, but at least let me say a few words to you in person. The house and the company, we can still discuss them. I listened, then did not reply. Instead, I opened a message from my lawyer, Margaret Forster. She had sent a concise confirmation. The board resolution has been filed with the company registry. The appointment of the interim CEO will be announced at tomorrow's 10 o'clock special meeting. Also, I have coordinated with Mr. Whitmore. The house handover is at 9 tomorrow, and his legal team will be present to witness. I typed back. Received. Thank you. Then I turned off my phone, leaned back in the driver's seat, and closed my eyes for a moment. The car was quiet, lit only by the pale blue glow of the dashboard. In my mind, the past 5 years flickered like film stock from the excessively lavish white hydrangeas at the wedding to the first Christmas dinner with James's family when his mother criticized my gift for not being proper enough. From the day my father was diagnosed and I called James from the hospital corridor only for him to hang up saying, "I'm in a meeting," to the nights I stayed in the gallery painting until 3 in the morning while he didn't even know I had left. All those fragments pieced together. Once I had thought they were the inevitable trials of marriage, now I saw them for what they were, a carefully woven net, each thread slowly strangling my neck. I restarted the car and set the navigation for home, my own home. A 2-bedroom flat, bought by my father in his name before he fell ill, now deeded to me, never known to James. For the past 6 months, every time I said I was on a business trip, I had been coming here to furnish it bit by bit. That was my safe house. The flat was in an old red brick building in the city center, no lift, but the 4th floor windows face south, and every afternoon sunlight stretched across the wooden floor of the living room. I carried my suitcase up the stairs, opened the door, and the sensor light in the hallway came on, a warm yellow glow illuminating a pot of pothos on the shoe cabinet, its glossy leaves trailing down, which I had watered last week. I pushed my suitcase into the bedroom, changed into a loose linen shirt, and walked barefoot to the kitchen to pour myself a glass of water. Outside, the city lights were coming on one by one. The distant Tower Bridge traced a clear silhouette against the twilight, and the Thames reflected scattered silver flecks on its surface.
My phone buzzed again.
This time it was a long message from Lydia, much milder in tone than her earlier text. Aileen, I know my mother and my brother have done many things wrong to you. I only heard all the details from my brother today, and I'm shocked and deeply sorry. I'm not writing to plead for them, I just want to make sure you're okay. We've been sisters-in-law for 5 years, and I don't want to lose the chance to talk to you because of their mistakes. If you're willing, we could meet for coffee sometime. I stood by the window with my water glass and read the message through, then paused for a moment. Lydia was different from her mother and brother. She had studied art history in Edinburgh and worked at a small auction house after graduation. She rarely got involved in the family squabbles. She had married early. Her husband was a secondary school teacher, and they lived in a quiet town north of the city, far from James's business circles and their mother's control. I typed a few words in reply. I'm fine. Some other time. Then I locked the screen. That night, I slept more deeply than I had in the past 6 months. No nightmares, no. Waking up in the dark to check my phone for James's messages, none of that suffocating weight on my chest. I even had a bright, surreal dream. I was standing in a vast field of sunflowers under an impossibly blue sky, the wind swaying the flower heads, golden pollen drifting onto my shoulders like fine sunlight. The next morning I woke at 7. After a shower, I put on light makeup, a charcoal gray tailored suit, and pinned my hair into a neat bun. The woman in the mirror had calm features, a faint morning flush on her cheekbones, and looked more alive than she had in years. At 8:45 I arrived at the villa. Mr. Whitmore's black saloon was already parked outside the gate. 2 people stood beside it, a tall, lean man in a charcoal gray bespoke suit, clearly Marcus Whitmore himself, accompanied by a young woman, presumably his assistant or legal counsel. They were chatting quietly by the garden wall. At the sight of my car, Whitmore checked his watch and gave a slight nod. I got out, carrying the briefcase with the title documents and keys. Ms. Aileen, punctual. Whitmore extended his hand long, dry fingers, a firm handshake. Mr. Whitmore, please come in. I gestured and unlocked the garden gate. We had barely stepped into the front yard when the villa's front door was yanked open. My mother-in-law stood in the doorway, her hair roughly pinned, dark circles under her eyes. Clearly, she had not slept well. Behind her stood James in the same rumpled shirt from yesterday, unshaven, looking like a wilted cabbage. Further back, sitting on the sofa in the living room, was a figure I recognized: James's uncle, Philip Cunningham, a slick middle-aged man who had spent most of his career in finance, now sitting with his arms crossed, wearing an expression that said, "I'm here to arbitrate." "Aileen, you really brought people to take the house?" James stepped forward, his voice hoarse. I stopped and stepped aside to let Whitmore and his assistant pass. "This is Mr. Marcus Whitmore, the buyer of the property." My voice was steady and clear. "And this is his legal assistant. As of 9 o'clock this morning, the title of this house officially transfers to Mr. Whitmore. I'm here today to assist with the handover." My mother-in-law's face went ashen. Her lips quivered twice, then she suddenly wheeled on Whitmore, shrieking, "Sir, we've lived in this house for 5 years. This woman sold it behind my son's back. It's fraud." Whitmore's expression did not change. He took a document from his assistant, pulled out one page, and handed it to my mother-in-law with polite but distant courtesy. "Mrs. Cunningham, this is the notary's certificate of transfer, bearing the owner's signature and the notary's seal. The transfer procedure is entirely legal and compliant. I understand your emotional attachment, but legally, this house now belongs to me." My mother-in-law stared at the document like a death sentence. Her shoulders began to shake. Uncle Philip rose from the sofa, walked quickly to the door, took the document, scanned it rapidly, then looked at me with cold, heavy eyes. "Aileen, you've gone too far," he said. "After all, we were family. Couldn't you have sat down and talked?" I met his gaze. "Mr. Cunningham, the word family may not apply very well in court. The divorce mediation is concluded, and all property divisions are being executed according to the legal ruling. If you have any objection to the title, you are welcome to contact my lawyer." James finally lost it. He rushed out the door, grabbed my arm, squeezing so hard my wrist ached. "Aileen, come inside with me, we need to talk alone." His voice was low, almost gritted out. "You can't do this to me. Was our 5-year marriage worth nothing to you?" I looked down at his hand gripping my wrist, then slowly raised my eyes to his bloodshot ones. "James, let go first." He didn't move. I said, "Let go." My voice did not rise in volume, but each word fell like a sharp icicle. Whitmore's assistant took half a step forward and cleared her throat politely. James's fingers loosened one by one, and he stepped back half a pace, his chest heaving. I rubbed my wrist and turned to Whitmore. "Please wait 5 minutes. I need to go upstairs for some personal items I left behind yesterday. 2 paintings." Whitmore nodded and retreated with his assistant to the shade of the garden, calmly reviewing documents as if the commotion at the door were mere background noise. I re-entered the villa. As I passed my mother-in-law, she stood like a statue, gazing hollowly at the file in Whitmore's hands, as if half her soul had been drained. I brushed past her and went upstairs. In a corner of the master bedroom wardrobe, leaning against the wall, were 2 framed watercolors my father had painted before he fell ill: one of the cliffs of the Cornish coast, one of an autumn forest in the Lake District. I had deliberately left them yesterday because they were too large for my suitcase. Now I carefully rolled them into a painting tube and sealed the lid. As I came downstairs, I saw that another person had arrived: Lydia. She wore a dark green knitted cardigan, her hair loose over her shoulders, standing by the sofa, her expression complex as she looked at her mother and brother. When she saw me, she hurried over and said quietly, "Aileen, I heard about the handover today, so I came by. Are you all right?" "I'm fine," I said with a nod. At that moment, James seemed to remember something. He pulled out his phone and stabbed at the screen frantically. After a few seconds, His expression shifted a mix of panic and disbelief. He looked up at me, his voice dry. "I can't log into the company's system on my phone. You really turned off all my access." "I told you yesterday." I tucked the painting tube under my arm and straightened my jacket collar. "HR executed the access clearance at 7 this morning. All your corporate email, intranet accounts, approval system logins all revoked." Uncle Philip interjected. "How could the board bypass the CEO to make such a resolution? You alone don't have the final say." "Mr. Cunningham," I turned to him, my tone calm, "you may not be fully aware of the shareholding structure. I hold 67% of the company's shares, absolute control. Of the 7 board members, 5 are independent directors I nominated and approved. Yesterday's emergency meeting met the quorum requirement, and the resolution was legally valid. The motion to remove James as CEO passed with 5 votes in favor, 1 against, and 1 abstention. Every step was compliant." Philip's lips moved, but he couldn't muster a retort. He knew the share structure perfectly well. He was just trying to pressure me with bluster, but today, no one would push me around anymore. I carried the painting tube out the front door. The early autumn sun was warm on my face. Whitmore approached and handed me a signed handover confirmation. I skimmed it and signed. "Pleasure doing business with you, Ms. Aileen." He extended his hand. "Pleasure doing business with you, Mr. Whitmore." I turned to my car. Behind me, the villa's front door still stood open, revealing several figures inside. My mother-in-law slumped on the sofa, James standing at the threshold watching my back, and Lydia by the window waving gently at me through the glass. I did not look back. I opened the car door, placed the 2 paintings carefully on the back seat, and started the engine. As I drove down the tree-lined avenue, my phone screen lit up. A new message from a contact saved as SR. "Heard you won yesterday. Free tonight? Same place, I'll buy you a drink." I smiled faintly and typed back one-handed. 8. Bring a good bottle. SR was an old friend from the art world. Sebastian Redburn, an independent gallery owner, and one of the few people during my marriage who never told me to just bear with it a little longer. When my father had been ill and I desperately needed money, he had lent me a sum without hesitation. Later, when I sold paintings to repay him, he said I was making a fuss over nothing. I tossed my phone back onto the passenger seat and merged into the flow of traffic. The city's light and shadows sped past the windows like a cascade of slides, each frame carrying the scent of old fragments, but those fragments were being left far behind. I knew that tomorrow there was an important meeting. The new CEO had to be finalized, and the strategic restructuring for the coming months had to be pushed forward. And then there was my own project, the studio I had quietly registered half a year ago, already booked for 2 decent-sized commissions, including one from a well-known European home brand. But that was all for tomorrow. Right now, I just wanted a good drink. The company headquarters occupied the 18th floor of a glass skyscraper in the financial district, with an expansive view overlooking all of Canary Wharf. I arrived at 9:30 in the morning. The receptionist, a young woman, looked up with widened eyes and quickly stood. Ms. Aileen, the meeting room is ready, and most of the directors are already here." I nodded and walked straight through the open-plan office. Employees glanced up in small groups. Some averted their eyes, some stared openly, others whispered among themselves. I knew the news had exploded inside the company over the past 2 days. The CEO removed the day after his divorce, the controlling shareholder taking back management in a mid-sized company of over 200 people. That was enough to generate a dozen different versions. I pushed open the meeting room door. 6 directors sat along the long table. The chair at the far end, once James's, was empty. I walked to the head of the table, pulled out the chair, and placed my tablet and a printed agenda before me. "Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for being on time." The directors nodded in greeting. To my left sat Godfrey Harding, a white-haired, old-school gentleman with keen eyes. He had been one of the company's earliest financial advisors, and his relationship with James had never been smooth. Godfrey had repeatedly questioned James's cost control plans in board meetings. On my right sat Isabel Crawford, a woman in her early 50s, crisp and capable, a former Asia-Pacific vice president of a multinational corporation, whom I had invited onto the board after her retirement. She had stayed neutral throughout the divorce turmoil, but she had never rated James's business acumen highly. Today's agenda has two main items. I open my tablet. First, formal confirmation of the interim CEO. Second, discussion of the company's next phase business restructuring. Godfrey took off his reading glasses and wiped them. Aileen, do you have someone in mind for the new CEO? Yes. I projected a resume onto the screen. Margaret Alcott, currently our general manager for the Nordic region. Over the past 3 years, her division has averaged 19% annual revenue growth and a 6-point increase in profit margins. Her management style is pragmatic and decisive, and her understanding of our brand direction is very clear. A photo appeared on the screen: a woman in her 40s, short hair, a bright smile, with a list of solid but unflashy achievements. Isabel leaned forward, studied it briefly, and nodded. I've met Margaret a few times. She's capable. Has she confirmed she's willing to take it on? I spoke with her last night. She's agreed to a 2-year contract. The compensation and option plan will be submitted to the remuneration committee today. The other directors exchanged glances. No one raised an objection. Under James, the company's strategy had drifted towards short-term opportunism, whatever made quick money, regardless of brand coherence, and several senior design team members had left. Margaret's style was the opposite. Then, that's settled for the first item. I closed the tablet. Now, the business restructuring. I plan to divest the home goods distributor that James acquired last year. That purchase had too high a premium, the integration costs far exceeded expectations, and it has been dragging down overall profits for the past 2 quarters. At the same time, we need to refocus on the original design line. That's the foundation on which this company was built. Godfrey tapped the table with his finger. I've been pushing for that divestiture for a while, but James kept shelving it. Now that you're driving it, the resistance will be much less. But have you found a buyer? We're in talks. A Swedish supply chain group has expressed interest, with an offer about 10% above our expectations. The terms should be finalized within the week. I paused. Also, my personal studio has recently secured a collaboration, a co-branded collection with a European home brand. If it goes well, we can operate it under the company's brand line. I've already prepared a profit-sharing framework. The meeting lasted nearly 2 hours, covering budgets, personnel, supply chain, and other topics. As the directors filed out at noon, Godfrey passed by me and patted my shoulder lightly. Well done, Aileen. It's about time. I packed up my papers. My phone lit up: a message from the nursing home carer. Ms. Aileen, your father is in good spirits today. He ate a good breakfast and even walked 2 laps in the garden this afternoon. I smiled and replied, thank you, then left the meeting room. In the afternoon, I went to my studio. The ground floor of the flat building had been converted into a small creative space. North-facing windows let in soft, diffused light. An easel stood by the window. Stacks of sketchbooks and paint tubes piled in the corners. The air held the scent of turpentine and linen. This was the haven I had secretly kept for myself in the later years of my marriage. Every time I said I was working late or meeting clients, I was often here until late at night. I put on an old linen apron, picked up a pencil, and stood before the easel. On the paper was a half-finished sketch: a garden scene, a vine-covered archway, a gravel path lined with white wildflowers. It was the garden my mother had loved most, in the old house that had long been demolished, but the image had stayed in my mind. The pencil moved across the paper, lines growing fuller. I drew for a long time, until the light outside shifted from bright midday to the warm gold of late afternoon, when my phone interrupted me. The screen showed an unfamiliar number, but the area code was from the north of the city. I hesitated, then answered. The voice on the other end was unexpected: Lydia's husband, Thomas Harper, a gentle-spoken, deliberate man. Aileen, sorry to call out of the blue. Lydia asked me to let you know that her mother was taken to hospital this morning. Her blood pressure spiked, too much emotional stress. The doctors say she needs to stay for observation for a few days. He paused. James is there too. He asked me to tell you. Well, he said he wants you to know, but he didn't ask you to do anything. I held the phone, pencil still between my fingers. Outside, a flock of pigeons flew across the sky, their wing beats faintly audible. "Which hospital?" I asked. Thomas gave the name and added, "Lydia said if you don't want to come, she completely understands. She just thought you should know." "I understand. Thank you, Thomas." I hung up and stood still for a few seconds, turning the pencil in my fingers. Then I put it back in the holder, took off my apron, grabbed my coat, and went out. The hospital was about half an hour's drive from the studio. By the time I arrived, dusk had fallen, and the corridor lights had switched to warm nighttime illumination. My mother-in-law's room was on the second floor. Lydia sat on a bench outside, holding a cup of cold tea. She looked up, startled, then stood. "Aileen, you actually came." "I was passing by," I said, a lie even I didn't believe, and sat down beside her. "How is she?" Lydia sighed. "Her blood pressure has come down a bit. The doctor said if she stays calm, she can go home tomorrow. But you know her, how can she stay calm?" She gave a wry smile. "My brother is in there with her. He went in just a while ago. Do you want to go in?" I looked through the frosted glass panel on the door. A dim yellow light shone inside, and I could make out a figure sitting by the bed. "In a moment," I said. Lydia set her cold tea aside and turned to me with a complex earnestness. "Aileen, standing in that house all morning today, watching my mother and my brother, honestly, I didn't think you'd gone too far." "That sounds strange, doesn't it? She's my mother, he's my brother. But when I saw you walking out with that painting tube, what I thought was she's finally free." I glanced at her. In the light, her profile resembled her brother's, but her eyes lacked his constant calculus of gain and loss. Instead, there was a clear, almost innocent openness. "Why did you marry my brother back then?" she asked suddenly. I thought for a moment. "Because he made me feel like I didn't have to carry everything alone. After my father fell ill, I was exhausted juggling the company, the hospital, the house. He was there for me then, bringing me meals every day, running errands, handling paperwork. When he proposed, I said yes." Lydia listened quietly, then said, "So you married that him, not the later one." "People change," I said. "Or maybe they just show their true selves." The hospital room door opened and James stepped out, holding an empty water glass. When he saw me sitting on the bench, he stopped dead, his expression flickering between surprise and something more complicated. He had lost weight, his eye sockets slightly sunken. He had changed into a clean light blue shirt, but still hadn't shaved. "Aileen," he said, just my name, as if unsure what to say next. I stood up. "I heard your mother was hospitalized. I came to check. It's good she's all right." My tone was neutral, neither deliberately cold nor warm, as if I were talking about something that had nothing to do with me. James's knuckles whitened on the glass. "Would you like to go in and say hello? She was just talking about you." Lydia inhaled softly, her gaze moving between us. "No," I said flatly. "There's nothing to say that would help her blood pressure." James didn't insist. He dropped his gaze, turning the glass absently in his hand. After a few seconds of silence, he said quietly, "Margaret took over at the company today?" "Yes. She's better suited than me." He said it without much emotion, as if stating an already accepted fact. I looked at him. This man, standing in the dim hospital corridor, light the layer of pride and entitlement that had once seemed so natural had been worn away, inch by inch. But I knew that didn't mean he had changed. It only meant the situation had changed. "James," I said, "I'm not going to say, 'I wish you well,' that would be insincere. But I want to make one thing clear. There will be no further intersection between us. The company is handled by the board and management. Your mother's affairs are yours." The line between us was drawn clearly yesterday. He looked up, opened his mouth, but only nodded. I turned to Lydia. "I'll go now. Take care of yourself." She stood and gave me a hug, brief and light, like a fleeting breeze. As I walked out of the hospital, night had fully fallen. Street lamps cast warm halos in the damp air, and the road glistened with a film of moisture, as if a fine rain had fallen unnoticed earlier. I stood at the top of the steps and took a deep breath. The air smelled of night-blooming jasmine and wet asphalt, cool and fresh. My phone rang. Sebastian. You're not standing me up, are you? I've already opened the wine. I laughed. On my way. Half an hour. I hung up and walked toward the parking lot. My heels clicked crisply on the damp asphalt, my shadows stretching long under the lamps. Somewhere in the hospital above, a window glowed, but I didn't look back. Sebastian's gallery was tucked away in a narrow alley in Soho, a modest storefront sandwiched between two coffee shops, easy to miss. But he had run it for nearly a decade, building a solid reputation in the art community, not chasing fashionable artists, but focusing on those with solid technique and a distinctive voice. My first body of work had been represented by him. I was 23 then, fresh out of Central St. Martin's, with little more than scant savings and a stack of self-framed drawings. I pushed the door open. A wind chime tinkled. The gallery was lit with warm track lighting. The paintings on the walls had changed, a few large-scale abstract expressionist oils, layers of pigment piled like geological strata. Sebastian sat at the counter inside, holding a glass of red wine. Another glass set before him. Clearly, he had been waiting a while. He was in his early 40s, with a neatly trimmed gray-brown beard, wearing a soft dark blue linen shirt with the sleeves rolled to his mid-forearms. When he saw me, he raised his chin and slid the waiting glass toward me. 20 minutes late. I stopped at the hospital on the way. I took off my coat, hung it on the back of the chair, sat down opposite him, and lifted the glass to smell it.
Nice.
Bordeaux. Saint Emilion. 2016. He clinked his glass against mine. The hospital? Don't tell me it's about your ex-husband. His mother had a blood pressure spike and was admitted. I went to see, but didn't go in. Sebastian raised an eyebrow but didn't press. That was what I liked about him. He knew when to ask and when not to. Our years of friendship had built a palette of mutual understanding that needed no constant adjustment. How's your studio coming along? He changed the subject. I heard you landed a collaboration? I took a sip. The wine was rich and full, with notes of blackberry and cedar. Yes, with the Swedish brand Relied. They want a textile series based on English gardens. I've done about a dozen sketches. I'll send them the first draft tomorrow. Relied. Sebastian's expression showed approval. Good taste. They're notoriously picky about collaborators. How did you get in touch? I met their creative director at Milan Design Week early this year. Just 5 minutes of conversation, swapped cards. Then they reached out to me later, saying they'd seen my old garden-themed work at a show. I shrugged. Lucky. Luck only finds those who are ready. He raised his glass. You've been holding back on new work for years, and I always thought it was a pity. Now it's coming out. I swirled the wine in my glass, my gaze falling on one of the paintings on the wall, large blocks of deep blue and dark green, interspersed with a few bright orange tints, like distant lights in a dark landscape. I think it's about time, too. We talked for a long time about gallery operations, recent art market fluctuations, old mutual friends, and next year's Venice Biennale. Outside, the night deepened, pedestrians grew scarce, occasional footsteps passed the alley entrance. Sebastian opened a second bottle. At one point he stopped and looked at me seriously. Aileen, you look different from 6 months ago. Different how? The crease between your eyebrows is gone. He traced a line on his own forehead. Before, every time you came here, no matter how relaxed you seemed, there was always that tension knitted in your brow. Tonight it's gone. I touched my own forehead. It was smooth and relaxed. I hadn't even noticed that crease before, but now that he mentioned it, I realized I must have carried it for 5 years, like an invisible tattoo marking all the exhaustion and resentment I had never voiced. Maybe, I said, searching for words, because I finally moved that house off my shoulders. Sebastian laughed. Then I toast that house and to its becoming someone else's. Our glasses clinked softly above the counter. That night, I returned to the flat close to midnight. After a shower and changing into pajamas, I sat by the window and went over the sketches I was to send to Lynn tomorrow. The drawings showed gardens full of white wildflowers, vines climbing stone walls, an old pear tree in the corner with branches bent by the wind. All those images came from real places, the backyard of the old house where my parents had lived in the suburbs. 3 years after my mother died, the house was sold, the garden probably long overgrown, but those lines and colors remained sharply etched in my fingers. I closed the sketchbook and was about to turn off the light when my phone lit up. It was Margaret Alcott, the new CEO, with a work email sent at 11:40 p.m. Her tone was professional and crisp, no small talk, summarizing her initial observations after taking over and listing 3 priority items for the coming week. I leaned against the headboard, read it, and typed back 2 words. Agreed. Thanks. Then I turned off my phone and pulled the covers up. In the distance, the low rumble of a night train passed over the tracks, steady and rhythmic, like the city's breathing. I closed my eyes and fell asleep quickly. The next few weeks moved at double speed, my calendar packed with meetings, emails, calls, and trips. With Margaret running day-to-day operations, my role as chair focused more on strategy and core resource connections. I was no longer mired in trivial execution. That freed up more time for my creative work. Elsa Lindemann, Lynn's creative director, replied to my sketches 3 days later with an enthusiasm that exceeded typical Nordic understatement. Aileen, there's a remarkably warm quality to these drawings. What we want is exactly that feeling, a garden not perfectly trimmed, but breathing and wild. Could you come to Stockholm next week? I'd like to discuss materials and color applications in person. So I booked a flight and flew to Stockholm on a Tuesday in mid-October. The city was draped in russet and gold autumn leaves, the air crisp as freshly poured apple cider. Elsa was tall, with short silver-white hair, wearing a sleek black turtleneck, looking younger than her years. She gave me a tour of their design studio and sample room, discussing fabric textures, color fastness, and printing techniques in detail. Your garden series has something very unique, Elsa said, standing over a sample swatch and running her fingers over the vine pattern printed on it. A lot of garden-themed designs are pretty, but your work has a quiet power. These flowers and leaves seem to know autumn is coming, so they bloom especially fiercely in summer. Is that a fair reading? I stood beside her, looking at the swatch, a warmth rising in my chest. Very fair. These drawings are based on my childhood garden. My mother tended it for years. After she passed, the garden quickly grew wild, but what I remember most vividly is her standing among the flowers, always watering, pruning, transplanting, as if she were racing against time to keep the blooms going a little longer. Elsa turned to me, little crinkles forming at the corners of her eyes. Then let's make that feeling well. After Stockholm, my life settled into a new rhythm: mornings in the studio painting, afternoons handling company business and emails, evenings out with Sebastian or other friends. Weekends I visited my father at the nursing home, pushing him in his wheelchair through the garden, telling him about new commissions or exhibitions. His eyes would shine as he listened, and sometimes he would pat my hand and say, "If your mother knew, how happy she'd be." In early November, I received an unexpected invitation. Lydia sent a message saying she and Thomas were having a small housewarming party at their new place in the north, an old house with a garden, and asked me to come. At the end, she added, "My brother and mother won't be there. Just me and Thomas and a few friends. Please come, okay?" I sat in the studio, staring at the message for a while, then typed, "What time? Should I bring anything?" On Saturday afternoon, I drove north. Lydia's new house was a 3-story Victorian terraced building, red brick walls covered with half-dead ivy, with a slightly unkempt patch of lawn in front. I rang the bell. Lydia opened the door herself, wearing an olive-green apron, a smudge of flour on her cheek, her smile unreservedly bright. "Come in." Perfect timing. Thomas just pulled the apple pie out of the oven. "It smells amazing." Half a dozen people were already inside, friends of Lydia and Thomas, a lanky history teacher, a round-faced woman from a publishing house, and a young couple with a 2-year-old girl. A real fire burned in the living room fireplace, wood crackling, the air filled with the mingled scents of baked apples, cinnamon, and mulled wine. Everything was warm and cozy, like a Dutch Golden Age interior. I sat in an armchair by the fire with my mulled wine, watching the little girl chase a ball of yarn on the rug. Lydia brought over a plate of sliced apple pie and sat on a footstool beside me. "How are you feeling?" she asked quietly. "Good," I said truthfully. "The house is lovely." She smiled, then seemed to remember something, pulled out her phone from her apron pocket, and showed me a photo-framed watercolor in a simple wooden frame, depicting a field of purple and white wildflowers under a pale gray-blue sky. "This is yours, isn't it?" Lydia said. "I saw it at a charity shop. The label said it was being sold on consignment by a private collector. I recognized it right away. It's from that group show you did in Edinburgh." I remember it clearly. I looked at the photo. It was indeed one of my graduation year pieces, sold to a collector whose name I'd long forgotten. Years later, it had turned up at a suburban second-hand shop. "If you want, I can buy it back for you," Lydia offered. I shook my head and handed the phone back. "No need. Once a painting leaves its artist, it has its own fate. Wherever it ends up is fine." Lydia put away her phone, was silent for a moment, then said softly, "Aileen, there's something I've wanted to tell you. I've been thinking a lot these months about my family, about you, and my brother. I can't apologize for him, that's not mine to do. But I can apologize for myself, for all those years I didn't speak up." I looked at her. There were so many times I saw my mother say those passive-aggressive things at the dinner table, or my brother casually dismiss your opinions, and I sensed something was wrong, but I always told myself, that's between them, I shouldn't interfere. Lydia looked down, fidgeting with the edge of her apron. Later I realized it was because I was afraid of the trouble, afraid that getting involved would drag me in. My not getting involved meant I just watched you carry it alone. The firelight flickered across her face, shadows dancing. "Lydia," I said, "you don't need to carry this for me. In any relationship, only the people in it bear responsibility. As a sister, as a sister-in-law, your choices, then I won't judge them. But your choice today inviting me here, telling me this, I've received it." She looked up, her eyes reddening slightly, but she didn't cry. She nodded firmly, then stood to refill my mulled wine. That night, when I left, a thin snow began to fall, the first snow of early winter, fine white specks melting instantly on the car windows. I drove through the darkness back to my flat, looked up at the warm light in my window. I had left a small night light on before leaving. I trudged up the stairs through the light snow, entered, poured myself a glass of hot water, then sat before my easel, opened a new sketchbook, wrote the date on the title page, and began to draw the branch of an old oak tree, its canopy stretching across the page, waiting for leaves to be added. Outside, the snow fell thicker and silence reigned. In December, I sorted through the works I had completed in the studio over the past year, selecting more than 20 for a small solo exhibition at Sebastian's gallery. I deliberated for a long time over the title, finally settling on a simple word: rooting. The curatorial concept revolved around transplanting and growth, plants torn from their old soil, taking root in new places, branches spreading out in fresh ground. Sebastian, after reviewing my list, managed to squeeze a week's slot into his busy Christmas schedule. "Your work deserves a good window," he said over the phone. "December in Soho brings a bigger crowd, more mixed than in summer, but that means unexpected buyers or critics might show up." I handled the installation myself, working with Sebastian's assistant to measure, hang, adjust lights. Every painting was moved multiple times until I was satisfied with its relation to the light and to its neighbors. The gallery was not large, with over 20 works arranged compactly yet spaciously on the white walls, colors unfolded in sequence, from the gray-green and earth-yellow underpinnings of early spring sketches, to the lush intensity of midsummer gardens, to the bare branches and berries of late autumn, ending with a few wintry scenes in pale blue-gray. On opening evening, more people came than I had expected. Sebastian's invitation list covered half of London's art scene: curators, critics, collectors, professors, designers. The clink of champagne glasses and murmurs of conversation wove a warm, white noise through the gallery. Some stood quietly before a painting for a long time. Others took photos of the description cards. I stood in a corner, holding a half-drunk glass of sparkling water, exchanging pleasantries with acquaintances. Then a tall woman in a dark green coat approached, about 60, with sharply cut silver gray hair, a lean face, but very bright eyes, with a focused, appraising gaze. Aileen Cunningham? She extended a hand-long fingers, a light grip. I'm Helen Watkins, from Tate Modern. Sebastian told me about you. I shook her hand, my heart skipping slightly. Tate Modern, one of the most important contemporary art institutions in Europe. Any connection with it was no small matter. Ms. Watkins, an honor. What do you think of the exhibition? I kept my pace measured, not wanting to seem too eager. She turned sideways, her gaze falling on a painting on the opposite wall, a meter-square oil painting of a pear tree leaning in the wind, an old scar on its trunk, yet its branches thick with small green fruit, against a thunderous gray-purple sky. The tree radiated a stubborn vitality. That reminds me of a tree I saw in the countryside years ago, Helen said. Struck by lightning, half the bark stripped off, but every spring it flowered and fruited. Your work has a clear stance, not simply declaring plants are beautiful, but declaring how plants live. Thank you. That's precisely what I wanted to express, I said. I grew up with a garden my mother cultivated. After she died, the garden went wild, but whenever I went back, the weeds and vines had grown even more fiercely than before. That vitality, it isn't defeated by the word ruin. Helen was quiet for a few seconds, then nodded. Next month we have a small group show on contemporary landscape narratives, and the theme fits your work very well. Would you be interested in sending 2 pieces? I paused, the sparkling water glass midair for a moment, then I kept my voice steady. Very interested. She took a business card from her coat pocket, only her name and a mobile number. Have Sebastian pass my email to you, and we'll work out the details. After she left, I leaned against the wall and let out a deep breath. Sebastian appeared beside me, a glass in hand, a faint smile playing on his lips. She spoke to you? Did you arrange it? I don't have that kind of pull, he took a sip. She came on her own after seeing the invitation. I told you your work deserves a good window. I looked down at the card, its matte paper, thick texture, Tate Modern. I repeated the name softly, like dropping a stone into a well, waiting for its echo to reach the bottom. In the week following the opening, the gallery sold 7 paintings, 2 of them bought by a collector from Zurich. Sebastian sent me the sales list with a note. Congratulations, you can raise your prices now. Double what they were 3 years ago is entirely reasonable. I looked at the numbers. I remembered 3 years ago, in the same gallery, with 5 works priced so low even Sebastian thought it was a shame. Only 2 sold, one of which he bought himself to support me. That was when I had discovered James transferring money from our joint account to his mother, labeled household expenses. But when I checked the statements, the account was nothing of the sort. I had sat in my studio painting until dawn, drawing a tree with half its trunk cut off. Some of those paintings now hung in this exhibition, viewed, discussed, bought by strangers, their prices doubled. They had grown out of my pain, but they no longer belonged to the pain itself. Just before Christmas, I received a parcel in the post. No sender name. The return address was illegible, but the postmark bore the date and area code, the neighborhood near James's mother's house. The parcel was small and light. I opened the brown paper to reveal a dark blue velvet box. I lifted the lid. Inside was a ring, my mother's wedding ring, which I had left in a drawer at the old house after her death. When the house was sold, I thought it was lost forever. It was simple, a platinum band set with a small sapphire, the inside engraved with my parents' initials. Beneath the ring lay a slip of paper, no salutation or signature, just one line in James's handwriting, more hurried than before. Found this among the old things while moving. It's yours. Merry Christmas. I held the ring in the kitchen, the gray-white winter daylight falling through the window onto the sapphire's cut surface, casting a small blue gleam. The radiator hissed softly. The refrigerator compressor hummed periodically. I was alone in this flat, but I didn't feel empty. I slipped the ring onto the middle finger of my right hand. It was half a size too large, but it caught just below the knuckle and wouldn't fall off. I folded the note and put it in a drawer. I didn't reply. On Christmas Day, I spent it with my father at the nursing home. The nurses had decorated the common room with streamers and mistletoe. Long tables were laden with roast turkey, cranberry sauce, and a big dish of stuffed baked apples. Father wore the new dark green woolen sweater I had brought him, warm and comfortable, and we shared a modest but fragrant lunch. The television played the Queen's Christmas broadcast. The residents hummed carols. Nurses wheeled dessert carts around, serving warm Christmas pudding. Father bit into his pudding and mumbled, "This is better than last year's." "Last year's was from this same nursing home," I said, laughing, as I cut a slice of turkey onto his plate. "Then my taste buds are back," he said with satisfaction then, as if remembering something important, fished an envelope from his sweater pocket. "Here, Christmas present." Inside the envelope was an old photograph and a folded piece of paper. The photo showed my mother in her youth, standing in a field of lavender, the wind blowing her floral skirt and long hair, laughing openly at the camera. The paper was a handwritten recipe, my mother's butter biscuit formula, in her neat handwriting, some of the ink blurred. "Your mother used to bake these every Christmas," Father said. "It was her mother's recipe. After she was gone, I never had them again. No one could make them taste the same." I looked at the recipe, its edges worn and soft from years of folding and handling, the paper a warm vintage cream. "Next Christmas I'll bake them," I said. Father's eyes lit up. "Then I'll have to eat 2 extra." It was evening by the time I left the nursing home. Christmas Eve streets were quiet. Most shops had closed early, their window displays glowing softly, reflecting the falling snow in warm oranges. On my drive back, the radio played an arrangement of Silent Night for piano and cello, slow and spacious. As I passed the embankment by the Thames, I pulled over, rolled down the window, and watched the river for a while. The city lights on the opposite bank wavered in the water, broken and reassembled by a light breeze. Cold air rushed in, carrying the faint irony scent of the river, clean and sharp. My phone lit up. A short message from Sebastian. "Just heard Helen's group show is confirmed. Your 2 paintings are in. Details after the holidays. Merry Christmas." I read the line twice, then leaned back in my seat. Outside, the snow fell fine and steady. The Thames flowed silently eastward. The past few months, I had been like a plant torn from its old soil, exposed to unfamiliar air. All roots bared. I had thought I would wither. But when the next rain came, I found new shoots emerging. I typed back, "Merry Christmas. See you after the holidays." I put the phone on the passenger seat, restarted the car, and drove into the quiet river of light that was Christmas Eve. I passed the neighborhood of the villa. I glanced at the familiar entrance of the tree-lined avenue, but I didn't turn. In the rearview mirror, that area grew smaller and smaller, finally merging into the night behind me, along with all the days and nights I had left behind. Ahead, the road was wide, the lights stretched on, snow still falling, but the windscreen wipers moved steadily, clearing the white specks to reveal the clear road ahead. I gripped the steering wheel, and a small smile tugged at my lips. The next morning, I baked my first batch of butter biscuits in my flat kitchen. Flour, sugar, butter, egg yolk, salt, and lemon zest following my mother's recipe. The warmth from the oven softened the whole room. The golden biscuits turned crisp at the edges, filling the flat with a sweet, nostalgic aroma as they cooled on the wire rack. I took a photo and sent it to my father. He replied with a voice message a few minutes later, laughter in his voice. "How do they taste? Have you tried one yet?" I picked up a still warm biscuit and bit into it, crisp, rich butter balanced by the fresh zing of lemon. "Yes," I said into the voice record button. "Exactly right." Outside, the first sunlight after the snow began to spread over the red brick wall, illuminating the pothose leaves on the windowsill. I stood in the kitchen, palms dusted with flour, the oven still warm behind me, the clear winter light before me. This flat is not large, but it is mine. This morning is ordinary, but it is free. After Christmas, January brought London's endless rainy winter. Raindrops drummed on the flat windows every day. The streets glistened wetly under gray skies. But I found myself especially fond of the studio during this time. Overcast days provided the best north light. Soft, even, without harsh contrasts, perfect for meticulous line work. The Tate group show was scheduled for mid-March. My two selected pieces were the pear tree and the white wildflower field. Helen Watkins sent me a detailed email herself, specifying installation dimensions and catalog text. At the end, she added, "I've been looking again at your exhibition catalog. That small pencil drawing to the left of the pear tree is also very moving. We should talk sometime." I screenshotted the email and sent it to Sebastian. He replied with a string of exclamation marks and a voice message. You know Helen has a reputation for being sparing with praise? For her to say, "we should talk sometime," is practically a rave review. Aileen, I wouldn't be surprised if she's already thinking about your next solo show. I laughed, not taking it too seriously, but a warm certainty settled in my heart like adding a log to a winter fire. The flames wouldn't leap immediately, but that steady heat made you willing to wait. One afternoon in late January, as I was applying final touches to the two pieces for the Tate, the doorbell rang. Through the intercom, I saw a figure downstairs, Lydia, standing in the rain under a dark blue umbrella, a white paper bag in her other hand. I went downstairs and opened the door. She folded her umbrella, shook off the water, and gave a slightly sheepish smile. I hope I'm not interrupting. I happened to be in town on errands and passed nearby, thought I'd drop something off. I brought her up to the studio. She looked around at the easel, the paint racks, the stacks of sketchbooks, and finally at the pots of pothos and freshly sprouted mint on the windowsill. It's so cozy here, she said. Even more than I imagined. She placed the white paper bag on the table. Inside was a jar of homemade lemon curd tied with cream-colored twine, and a small bundle of dried herbs, rosemary and eucalyptus, giving off a clean, aromatic scent. The lemon curd I made myself. The lemon tree in Thomas's garden produced an especially good crop this year. The dried flowers are just something I put together. She rubbed her hands together a little self-consciously. I promise, no ulterior motive. I just thought that in winter, receiving something yellow might brighten the mood. I looked down at the jar. The curd was a bright amber, flecked with fine lemon zest, setting through the glass. My nose prickled faintly, but I quickly composed myself. Thank you, Lydia, I said. Then I turned and took a small unframed pencil drawing from the shelf. A half-open window, with a vast gray-blue sky and a vague cluster of trees outside. This is for you. Not a formal work, just a quick sketch. You can find a frame for it. She took it, looked at it for a long time, then looked up with warm, crinkled eyes. I'll frame it properly. She tucked the drawing carefully into her bag, then reached out and gave me a hug, longer and steadier than the one at the hospital. We sat in the studio drinking tea and chatting about small things. She told me Thomas was planning a history club trip to Bath in spring, that their fat ginger cat had stolen a whole salmon fillet, that her mother had started attending a community knitting group, and her blood pressure had stabilized. She mentioned these things casually, neither avoiding nor dwelling, as if they were simply natural facts. As she left, the rain had softened to a fine drizzle. I walked her to the door. She opened her umbrella and glanced back. Can I come to the exhibition in March? Of course, I said. I'll save you 2 tickets. She smiled, waved, and walked into the drizzle. In early February, the company sent me news that was mildly surprising but not shocking. Margaret mentioned at a routine board meeting that James had contacted her after his departure, not to ask to return, but to provide an informal memo on potential risks in a product line he had led last year, along with suggested adjustments. He was quite restrained, Margaret said over the phone, her tone even. Not boasting or fishing for credit, just sent a folder with a note saying, "For your consideration." I reviewed it, and there were indeed a couple of useful observations. I stood by the window in the flat, listening. Outside, the sky was gray, but a line of light was visible on the distant horizon. Take whatever you find useful, I said. Don't let the source bias you. If it benefits the company, it doesn't matter who raised it. Margaret agreed, and the conversation shifted naturally to other business. That memo was left behind like a filed tag once labeled. It would no longer occupy daily life. On Valentine's Day, I went to the studio as usual to paint. Shop windows filled with red velvet and pink roses, but my life had none of that. That afternoon, I drew a new sketch, a cherry tree just beginning to bud, the flower buds still tightly wrapped like clenched fists, but the lines already carried clear signals of spring. Sebastian messaged, "There's a small event at the gallery tonight, want to come?" Not Valentine's themed, it's a photography show by a recent graduate. Interesting work. I wiped the pencil dust from my fingers and replied, "What time?" That evening, the gallery was not crowded. The photography show was titled Weeds at the City's Edge by a young woman named Eve, who had captured self-sown plants along abandoned railway tracks and wastelands in London. In her large-format images, weeds pushed through gravel, shrubs spread across rusted rails, a quiet, stubborn dignity. I stood for a long time before one photograph, a cluster of purple-flowered wild vetch, with the blurred outline of distant high-rises in the background. Sebastian brought over 2 glasses of wine and stood beside me. "You've been looking at that one for a while." "It reminds me of something from childhood," I said. "There was a vacant lot behind our old house left alone, and in summer it filled with wildflowers. My mother used to say, 'Flowers that need no tending bloom the wildest.'" He nodded, looked at the photo silently for a moment, then said, "Aileen, I've known you for years. You never used to talk about your mother. When did that change?" I thought about it. I suppose it started last autumn, after the divorce. Something unblocked. Before, whenever I thought of her, my heart would ache like a tap that wouldn't stop dripping. Now it doesn't. Now when I remember her, I feel more gladness than sorrow. I looked at the wild vetch and said softly, "There's more gladness." Sebastian didn't reply, just touched his glass gently against mine. The wine swayed, catching a warm amber gleam from the light. In early March, the Tate Group exhibition opened. On opening night, I wore a dark blue velvet dress. Sebastian had helped me choose it over a fortnight, with my hair loosely pinned, wearing my mother's emerald earrings. Standing at the gallery entrance, my palms were slightly damp, but my breathing was steady. Helen Watkins, in her opening remarks, mentioned my name briefly but pointedly. Aileen Cunningham's 2 works bring a very rare perspective to this exhibition. They address the apparently gentle theme of garden, but the true protagonist is growth itself. These flowers and trees are not pleasing anyone's eye. They are simply completing their own cycle. Applause. Heads turned in my direction. I stood among the crowd, smiling and nodding, not showing too much emotion. But inside, a door had swung open, letting in a bright wind. My father could not attend, his health didn't permit evening outings. But I had arranged for a carer to help him watch the live stream on his tablet. The next morning he called me, his voice louder than usual. "I saw it. Your 2 paintings hung right on that middle wall. And what that lady said about you, I heard it all." "Dad, that was a Tate curator," I said, unable to suppress a laugh. I know," he said excitedly, his voice trembling. "But she was right. If only your mother could have seen it." I held the phone by the window. The March light was fuller than in winter, a warm golden honey, like malt sugar dissolving in warm water. "She sees it," I said. I hung up and texted Lydia. "The exhibition is busy today. I still have your tickets coming this weekend." She replied instantly, "Saturday afternoon with Thomas. Is the lemon curd almost gone? I'll make another batch in spring." I sent back a nod emoji. Outside, the old plane tree below my flat had sprouted a layer of pale green shoots, thin, tender, like paint that would dissolve at a spring breeze. I watched those new buds for a while, then turned back to my easel, opened a fresh sheet, and made a single light stroke in the center, a gentle curve, waiting for an entire summer's worth of color to fill it in.